Hassan used to be a school teacher. Fixing cars was a side project. She claimed to be pretty good at both, and I believed it. The pile of scrap in my shed was starting to take shape. It even made a buzzing sound if I hooked the battery up. We had essentially a drivable set of wheels, albeit with an engine too small for the size of the undercarriage. My job was to work the inside, fashioning seats and racks for stuff. And the heavy lifting, of course. Hassan's job was to know what she was doing. We were following that design guide for the APC, not that our thing was anywhere close to that advanced. Great, plenty of pages we could just skip, sticking to the engine, armor, and perhaps a steering wheel just to be luxurious. She was often to be found sitting by the miniature forge in the corner of the barricade room, gradually turning the torn-up bits of garage doors I was hauling into fresh metal. Road signs too. I always suspected they were good for this, and Hassan's delight at seeing a nice red octagon confirmed it. After a few days, we'd piled up loads of metal sheets in the shed, some of which Hassan had hammered into vague shapes against a makeshift anvil. It was actually the base of a streetlight with a barbecue fire pit dish melted over the top. She said she used to teach crafts. I'll never say that was a waste of time again. The downside was that our bunker became boiling hot all the time. I pilfered a sleeping bag and napped up in the camp's watchtower. Hassan procured herself a bell to ring to wake me up when visitors or wild animals got in. It was quite the domestic life, with the odd midnight machine gun battle to spruce things up. In between, we ended up telling each other our whole stories. They were fantastically boring and nostalgic. I found that I didn't want to recall the old world. Better to keep treating this weird life of mine as something entirely different, with a new body, a new person even. Hassan had the curse of still being her old human self, laced with dread and fear in a way I could no longer appreciate. She always had a smile, but one wrong word would see it drop off in an instant. In particular, she didn't like the topic of her work with this Eastcom, the military government that was running the show to the east, or was running it until that president and her cabal took charge in a bloody drama a few months ago. Now it was all a gigantic mess that dried up Hassan's throat. I don't think much of an organized society remained, even less than Hassan implied. That might be good news for me. With all I was learning, becoming a wild animal was seeming the best option, essentially to live as I had been doing already these last 2 months. It was almost pointless to speculate on how it would go, even with the end in sight. After a week, we had all the stuff we'd need for our build ready. In fact, the vehicle was drivable, just as a set of wheels and an engine. Hardly an achievement, since Hassan's mini motorbike would suffice if that was all we needed. The next step was armor, comfy seats for the front, and a big trunk for the back. The APC design came in handy here, since the passenger section could become a portable cache of supplies. How much did we need? Neither of us knew. The actual plan was that we were going to blast our way out of a checkpoint somewhere to the west, and then drive. Hassan didn't intend to come with me, yet didn't seem to have a different plan. She'd be killed if caught outside, I thought. Well, I made sure the thing was going to have 2 decent seats, and she didn't object. Oh, and as for the other work I was doing, my development, it really did carry on. I found that my arms and legs were moving faster. It's hard to describe. When I wanted to pick something up, it was like my hands were already there before I was done thinking about it. Super reaction speeds. Nice. How were things going for my many adoring clones out there? I met a few more in the Mist Knight hordes, all much chunkier than the rest of their comrades. The good news was that while they were also wired to blow, the wiring was messed up and nothing came of it. I wanted to ask the colonel about all this, however we had a serious lack of electricity since Hassan's oxygen compressor was sucking up everything it could get. Plus we did need a couple of lights in the cell to remain on most of the time. My short stint being connected to the outside world was over. The next connection would have to be a visit in person, although they already had copies of me, I presume, the patient that didn't zombify and get thrown into my inbox. My job became mainly the hauling. Hassan spent the days in the shed doing technical work, while I ran errands to town or worked on repairing damage done inside the cell. Somehow I thought getting the components would be the slow part, but not really. Welding wasn't Hassan's speciality, and even less so mine. I had to scour the town for gas to power the welding unit, and once I had that, I needed to keep looking for more. This steel shell with an underpowered engine wasn't going to be fuel efficient, even I could tell that. In between the work, we both sat beside the forge and used its flame to cook the cell's generous stock of rations, combining various cans together to make bubbling stews. Great smell, although the place was so thoroughly ventilated it didn't last for long. Hassan eventually told me about the early days of EastCom. The East Coast was healthy at first. The Diomedian bacteria seemed to emerge around the Great Lakes, with its true ground zero a secret taken to a large number of graves. It was a deadly disease spread in drinking water, mutating quickly into a less deadly disease spread by contact with the reanimated. The East Coast had been locked down by military units, who soon organized EastCom to replace local governments. The old governments were breaking all the rules same as everyone else. A wartime environment was developed on both coasts, while the middle was the bacteria's playground and the scientific establishment's bounty. Hassan said Westcom were the ones who worked out how to use vectors, single combatants with plankton in their lungs, placed in isolated areas to draw the zombies away from important places. In fact, it worked so well that Westcom stopped transmitting anything a couple of weeks ago, probably collecting up all the zombies that would otherwise be over here. EastCom was more careful, but by the time they had perfected their craft, there was a shortage of people willing to go on suicide missions. Crazy Jake's solution? Don't tell them it's a suicide mission, or put a comatose guy in a coffin and see if his optimistic attempts to survive do the trick. Westcom was dead, and I really was the chosen one. Crazy problems require crazy solutions. That's not to say I appreciated his latest project, that being the explosive reject me clones. More came on the mist nights during this week. They were strong and helped the Horde tear the first of my doors right off the wall, body full of shrinking bullet holes. The regular zombies were getting more like that too, taking a rattling burst of the machine gun just to knock over, and half the time they got back up after a minute and kept coming. Despite all the extra ammo I'd loaded from the nearby hidden houses, I was back to shooting on economy mode. Had 1,000 9mm cartridges that I could shoot from Hassan's MP5 submachine gun as a backup, but having to switch and refill magazines all the time let loads of zombies get right up close. Towards the end of the same night I lost my first door, a me clone reached the front. Since I'd killed these guys off for a few nights without incident, I thought I was safe from the bombs. Colonel might even have been dead if the murderous nature of the president was anything like Hassan claimed. Nope. Amid the crowd just a few feet in front of me beyond the bars, a sneaky me pushed himself up against the second door, it was right behind the first, and waited. A couple of seconds passed while I emptied another magazine into the black coat on his body. Didn't do much. Then I heard that high-pitched electrical shriek and jumped to the floor. Bang. The blast only clipped me, and I was back up right away. It had leveled a few zombies for me, pretty nice. The door, somehow, was only deformed. The worst of the damage had been applied around it. The natural stone floor below had shattered, exposing a ditch of soft burnt clay and sand below. The metal bands wrapping the pillar the door was fixed to splayed off like fingers. The bars between me and the monsters bent easily, having already been forced back into shape after the last bombing. The only saving grace was that it was already nearly 4, the time when the satellite beaming down nutritious plankton rays moved on. A few shotgun bursts down the torn-up tunnel kept Hassan and I safe until the zombies lost their appetite. I was forced to stop hoovering up any gas I could find in town and spent the next 2 days bricking over the damaged section of the tunnel. Last thing I wanted was a little weak point that could let the zombies get below my perch or around the twist of doorways. There were plenty of exposed walls inside that could be broken into with just a fraction of the explosive power the clones were packing. Hassan said in consolation that the base probably didn't have that many explosive munitions left. They had been just about out of jet fuel, nearly out of regular gas, and rationing everything else strictly, hence the pittance they afforded for my survival, although simple scientific malice factored into that too. So here's the bad news. The next wave got the right idea. A few came down the tunnel, only a few, and led me to believe it was going to be an easy one. Then I started to hear them, scratching, clawing, drowning in loose soil eternally, unable to die and unable to stop digging. A surge of soil suddenly erupted from the ceiling just above the end of the main tunnel. This was about the best result I could hope for. If they'd dug only a few more feet along, they would have come out on my side of the bars. As it stood, they'd made themselves a way to get up on top of the wall that hosted the second door, then had to try and tear the brick ceiling away to actually get inside. They were mostly exposed to my barrage of shotgun shells, which slowed any further progress they made dramatically. Still, it made for a great distraction. Another of my mutant kin came charging down the main tunnel, roaring and carrying something like it was a football. A bomb. This time I saw what was really happening with these things. The me clone was flicking a switch on the plastic casing, beginning that electric warning pitch. I watched him do it, then we made eye contact. He looked quite happy and held the bomb at arm's length, closer to me. I got a shot off, then rocketed back into the wall with the familiar pain of broken bones. I'd be alright by morning, so don't sweat it. It was our layer that really suffered. My makeshift flooring was eviscerated or melted, leaving a pit in front of the barricade. Some of the bars had finally come loose. Not such an issue, since I'd already prepared more, roughly cut to length and ready to just jam into place as a temporary solution. As I sorted that out, more zombies waddled up and stumbled into the new pit. Useful, I thought, until I noticed they could actually get a hold of the bottom of the second door, the floor below it having been shattered to easily removed pieces. One of those very ugly super zombie variants, guts hanging out and face locked in a toothy glare, stamped up to the door. While I was shooting at those up in the ceiling, or those trying to get a handhold on my bars, the super zombie bent the door with sheer strength, breaking its own arms off in the process, yet giving enough of an opening for its friends to crawl in and collectively tear it from the wall from inside and out. 2 doors down, 1 to go. I was getting plenty of body chemistry, if you're the sort of person who still thinks that was important. The Colonel did, but what did the me clones think of it? Seeing that one operate the device willingly, with a smile, was too real. I really hoped that these were the rejects, not the actual product they were going for. Hassan, smiling, hoped that too. We made quite the pair of merry jokers, living our strange life like it was normal, and knowing that to some extent it was the new normal. Hassan was happy to report that she was nearly there with the work up in the shed. I had plenty to do, essentially rebuilding parts of the tunnel from scratch, using wet clay to fix rocks in place at the ceiling breach. It would hold them for at least a minute or two. I did have large transit sacks for hauling cement, which I turned into giant sandbags. That was once I was done using them to haul soil from the surface to fill up the cave below the barricade, burying a few zombies who couldn't climb out in the time I was gone. Everything needed something to survive, so they would die off for real down there one day, I told myself. Might even be true. No plankton, no mist, but that hand I'd dug up in the corpse garden of Osterville. Hassan thought it killed them, admitting though that no one had ever dug up the buried ones to check, so maybe not. Great. After 2 days of hard work trying to patch the cell up, the next wave came. Hassan took a double dose of her sleeping pills. The oxygen haul had been slowed by cloudy weather. I did tell her, by the way, that I could probably finish the armoured car by myself now, and she should just take her bike and see how far its fuel could get her, maybe far away enough to avoid the mist. She informed me all that wasn't going to happen, for too many reasons to explain. I think I knew a few anyway, since I was lying and all. Everything I'd done to block the zombie-made tunnel wasn't enough. They broke the shoddy stone wall over the entrance over by the ramp, and then happily scraped out all the soil and sand I had put in there. Took them roughly 2 hours to work back to where they were before, then they carried on working at the ceiling of the cell entrance. Another tunnel opened up to my right, falling even shorter than the other, and essentially just feeding zombies into the killing zone, so no problems there. Of course, what else could I do but put my ear to the wall now and again, and wonder where the third tunnel was going to emerge. It was like having an ant colony form around you, with the bunker becoming a death trap one fistful of mud and gravel at a time. There was only one me mutant that night. He didn't charge in like the others. I didn't recognize it as me at first. The lights in the tunnel had all been destroyed, so all I had was a flashlight on the floor beside me pointing down range, and another taped to my tight army helmet. So yeah, almost looked like just another customer. This guy stopped about halfway down the tunnel. I was in the habit of waiting for visitors to get up close before shooting, to save bullets. I was down to 300 mg cartridges, all of which I'd use up that night. We ended up looking at each other. I saw him unstrap a thing, a bomb, from his belt. He held up his arms and pressed it against the ceiling. In the delusion of darkness, I thought he was surrendering, which was when I realized it was a me mutant. I shouted for him to drop the bomb. He remained still. I shouted it again. I could hear something crawling up the ceiling tunnel. Didn't have time for this Mexican standoff. I said I would shoot the guy and bury him in the ground forever if he didn't drop the bomb or leave. No, he said. At the time, and for the days after this, I wasn't sure if I really heard that. I did. He said it, followed right away by the electrical whine. I crouched and avoided the blast, plus it was further away than the previous attempts, deliberately so. The bomb dropped the tunnel ceiling, already weakened by the zombies digging right above it in their new warrens. The way was mostly blocked, and the power to the cell was cut completely. I put a hand to the nearest of the dozens of air vents. No flow. In some ways a good thing. In others, more immediate to the mind, it was the conversion of the cell to a crypt. On the bright side, the zombies were still digging, and partially cleared the tunnel with their efforts by moving all the fallen soil around, albeit making the collapse worse at the same time. They were still getting through, therefore we could still get out. Just had to keep shooting, emptying the machine gun at last, and returning to the MP5 and shotgun. The flashlight on the floor dimmed and dimmed, but my helmet light was enough to work with in these small spaces. The killing was easy from here, and was done by about 5 AM. I woke Hassan, and told her we'd better go. She took a look at the mess, then agreed. She said it was fine. She packed up the food into a military case so heavy that only I could carry it. I worked on clearing a roughly passable route back to the ramp, where fresh and cold air came as a welcome reward. Finally, and somewhat suddenly, we were dragging ourselves up and out for the last time. I took the crate to the shed and admired Hassan's work. I'd looked at it briefly the previous night while stretching my legs, and despite no further work being done, it had grown in stature to become the greatest mechanical creation of human history that morning. It really did look like the Night Fairy vehicle, on the outside. Armoured front with 2 basic hatches to look through. I could already tell it would be a nightmare to drive, but that's all relative. Inside it was essentially 2 pilfered leather seats, some bars to hold onto, and a space for all our stuff, best access through the rear, a big single plate on a brutally stiff hinge that screamed open. We loaded it up with food, weapons, and those explosive charges Hassan had ordered from the captain. Our overloaded suspension wasn't going to give them a smooth ride. Hassan said it was fine, same as with everything else. Then she told me about another part of her plan. In her luggage, she had these rolled up orange things. Radiation protection, she said after rolling one out. It was a humanoid shape, head to toe. It was barely thicker than a raincoat, and the transparent face section had the consistency of a plastic bag. If the rad ray is still there, it might be enough. If worse comes to worst, we'll dig snow out of the way on the other side while the truck stays in the tunnel, she said. I should explain that A, she called our creation a truck, B. We were heading for a road tunnel built into the rubble mountain by the old guard. C. She thought the snow was something to do with the effect that had repelled me before, as did I. And D. She didn't think that worst had come to worst already. She asked me to do the honours by turning the engine on, ruining it immediately by adding that she tested it all the day before. Well, it still worked now. Pressing the square gas pedal moved it forward, crunching the fake snow. Its pickup truck gas tank was 2/3 full. Enough? You already know Hassan thought so. I didn't really care. I went over to the camp and entered the tent with the camera. It was still there, probably a little weathered by now. I moved a whiteboard on the opposite side to be in front of the camera. Then I wrote, "I quit" in red marker. Could have written something much stronger than that, but that's the coolest thing I'd come up with in 2 weeks of planning this stunt. I gave the lens the finger just to be sure, although I doubt it was actually on right then. And that was how I lost my job. It was time to hit the road.